Good morning, everyone. So, one might ask themselves, how did someone who did not campaign get more than 80 million votes? Get more votes than any other presidential candidate in history. Over 12 million more votes than Barack Obama got in 2008. How exactly did this happen from a presidential candidate who didn't even campaign? Well, this could not have happened without the help of big tech. Big tech is able to reach more people than any other organization, than any other platform, and they aided Joe Biden in overcoming what was his biggest deficit. And his biggest deficit was with enthusiasm, and this was clear. Joe Biden could barely fill a janitor's storage closet with the number of attendees that would attend his rallies. Meanwhile, in the days leading up to the election, in Pennsylvania, for example, a state that Donald Trump lost, he got 60,000 people to turn out to one of his rallies the day before the election. So explain exactly how that happened. How did someone who had so much voter enthusiasm, who had so many people coming out to his rallies, how did he lose to someone who seemingly had no voter enthusiasm, who was running a very flat campaign where there was no excitement behind their candidate? How exactly did this happen? Well, what big tech did is they handled the marketing for Joe Biden, and they aided him in helping him overcome the enthusiasm gap. So if you're not very enthusiastic about voting, then you need two things to happen. Number one, voting needs to be very, very easy. Number two, you need constant reminders. So the Democrats push for universal mass mail-out voting, and there's several different reasons that you can speculate why they had done this. But one thing is clear. One thing is absolutely indisputable. Mail-in voting is easier than going in person to vote. And that's the point. And Facebook constantly reminded all of their users of this, that mail-in voting is safe, it's easy, it's effortless. You can vote from your living room, you can vote from your home. You need to vote. Your voice needs to be heard in the 2020 election. We saw this pinned to the top of every single Facebook feed from every single Facebook user in the country. It was the biggest marketing campaign that Facebook has ever put together. And these aren't my words, these are Facebook's words. Look at this article released by Facebook themselves. This is from June 16, 2020. Facebook launching the largest voter information effort in U.S. history. And if you scroll down here, you probably recognize this because you probably saw this at the top of your feed, where you saw make sure you're registered to vote. And we saw these reminders constantly throughout the election. And Facebook's goal was to reach 4.5 million people, to get 4.5 million people to vote in the 2020 election. And you probably saw these reminders as well, right here. Make sure you're ready to vote. Voter Information Center. And then even not just on Facebook, but on other platforms that Facebook owns as well. On Instagram and on WhatsApp as well, there was constant reminders to vote. So across all social media platforms. And Google played a role as well. You probably recognize this image right here. This was the image that Google put on their homepage the day before the election. How many people do you think saw that image? And which party do you think benefited the most from these reminders to vote? Once again, I have to remind you, do you think the 60,000 people that attended Trump's rally in Pennsylvania, do you think they needed to be reminded to vote? I would say that they would walk over broken glass barefoot to vote for Donald Trump. But with Joe Biden, there just wasn't that enthusiasm. How the hell are you going to get people to go out and vote if you can't even get them to show up at your rallies? This is where big tech came in. Constant reminders to vote, vote, vote. And once again, this helps the candidate that is suffering from a lack of voter enthusiasm. So you overcome the lack of voter enthusiasm by constant reminders to vote. And then, of course, the Democrats did their part on the legislative side by advocating for universal mass mail-out voting. And then Facebook reminded you that universal mass mail-out voting was extremely, extremely safe. I would be remiss if I did not talk about social media censorship, because this played a huge, monumental role in this election. And the most egregious of cases was what happened with the censorship of the New York Post story, in which they reported on a scandal with Joe Biden's son Hunter Biden, in which Joe Biden was closely tied to the story as well. And the New York Post was locked out of their account for 2 weeks for posting the story. Keep in mind, the New York Post is the 4th largest publication in circulation. They are the oldest publication in circulation as well. In addition to that, the White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, was locked out of her account for simply retweeting the story. The Trump campaign Twitter was also locked out of their account for reposting the story. Facebook slowed the spread of the story. And when Jack Dorsey was subpoenaed before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and he was asked by Ted Cruz point blank, do you have any indication at all that the Hunter Biden story is not true, that the Hunter Biden story is Russian disinformation? He said no. Despite all of those things, they censored the story. Why? Why would they censor the story? To help Joe Biden. There's literally no other reason why. And this was one of many, many stories that was censored. There's many other smaller stories that were censored leading up to the election, but this is when the gloves came off and big tech wasn't even pretending to be objective anymore. They weren't even pretending to be unbiased anymore. In addition to that, big tech as well as Democrats targeted low information voters. So what do low information voters see? Well, they only see what is on the headlines. They scroll through their Facebook feed, they read the headlines, and what do the headlines say? They say orange man bad, because nearly all coverage of Donald Trump was negative. In addition to that, any negative coverage about Joe Biden was suppressed or censored outright. And when you have these things, when you have low information voters, when you have politically inactive voters, they don't really care about politics, don't really follow politics. The way you get them to turn out in the masses is you constantly remind them to vote. You tell them to vote like their life depends on it. These are the words of Michelle Obama. So when you couple all of these things together, with big tech censoring any sort of negative coverage about Joe Biden, with the mainstream media constantly pumping out their narrative of orange man bad, and you have big tech doing all of the marketing for Joe Biden, telling everyone to go out and vote to try to overcome the voter enthusiasm gap, because you know Joe Biden voters aren't very excited about going to the polls and actually supporting their candidate. When you combine all of these things together, that's how you rig an election. That's my video. Hope you like it. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe, and I will see you all next time.